everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Bio podcast. My name is Wendy Lee Curtis, and I will be your host today. I am super excited to sit down to be in community and conversation with our next speaker. Shola Richards is the CEO and founder of Go Together Global, the best-selling author of Making Work Work and Go Together, and he is a civility writer with a passionate worldwide following. His articles and extremely popular Go Together movement email series have been read by readers in all the countries. And his work has been featured on The Today Show, CBS This Morning, Forbes, Black Enterprise, Complete Wellbeing India, Business Insider Australia, and in numerous other outlets all over the world who recognize him as an authority on workplace happiness and engagement. As a speaker, Shola has shared his transformative message with top universities, leading healthcare organizations, Silicon Valley, the motion picture industry, on the TEDx stage, and in his greatest honor to date, in September 2021, he was invited to testify in front of the House of Representatives on Capitol Hill to share his expert recommendations on how to bring more civility to Congress. Last but absolutely not least, Shola is a father, a husband, an identical twin, and self-professed kindness extremist who will not rest until bullying and incivility is extinct from the American workplace. Please welcome to the Beyond the Bio podcast, Shola Richards. Hi, Shola.
Hey, Wendy, what is up? First of all, I have to admit, and this is a huge weakness of mine, I literally have no idea what to do with my face when my bio is being read. So I am looking away. I'm pretending to arrange things on my non-existent desk. I just don't know. Should I be yeah. Or should I be
I was going to say you're wearing a collared shirt. Pop your collar.
Oh, collar's popped. It's ready to roll. I mean, I put a little pop of color on for you, Wendy Lee Curtis. I know how you roll, so I had to make sure to look a little pink in here, make sure that I'm ready to go.
Well, you are more than prepared.
I'm trying.
Look at that, Robert. Look at you. I always like to start at the beginning. My journey to this place has been a series of curves and winds, ups, downs, and all arounds. How did Shola Richards end up here in this space doing what he does?
Gosh, in a large part, kind of by accident. I think a lot of people who get into speaking or whatever it is that they want to do, maybe some people grew up I want to be a speaker growing up, and I was one of those kids growing up. I thought it'd be cool, but I never thought I could make a living doing it. But something happened to me that kind of allowed me to get pushed into sharing my message. To make a long story painfully short, growing up as a kid, I was bullied a lot. I had a speech impediment. I stuttered a lot, and I had really crooked teeth. Thank God for braces. However, I was an easy target for the bullies. And as I got older, thinking that the bullies would grow up and learn how to behave in a way that's respectful and kind and compassionate, that didn't happen, at least in the workplaces that I found myself early in my career. One particular workplace was so just irredeemably toxic and awful. It's like a cesspool of negativity. And after dealing with this for such a long period of time, I ended up falling into a very deep depression. And again, I don't use that term euphemistically. I mean it sincerely, clinically depressed. And to make a long story short, one morning while driving to this incredibly toxic job, this is about probably, I don't know, close to 20 years ago, I said out loud, I'm done. I am done. And unfortunately, I wasn't saying that I was done with the job. It was a little bit darker than that. I made a decision that I was going to take my own life. And I share this story on stage, and every single time when I share it, I always I choke up a little bit because it's hard for me to get it out. It's hard for me to ever got to that dark place based on how some random people at work treated me. But I did. I attempted suicide. I tried to drive my car off the I-405 freeway here in Los Angeles and attempt to make it look like an accident. Long story short, thankfully the guardrail held. And I've been spending the past 20 years or close to it, not just trying to unpack what happened in that moment, but more importantly, creating a workplace where that, or work environment in our country, and dare I say the world, where these types of behaviors of bullying, harassment, discrimination, etc., are extinct from the American workplace. And I was kind of like on the hero's journey where it's like, who am I to do this? I'm not trained in speaking. I don't have this type of stuff. And I decided to lean into learning how to do this so I could share my message. And thankfully, people have been open to it. And as they say, the rest is history.
You became the hero that you needed for yourself, for
That's
other
true.
people.
That's a
All
good way
about
to put it. Never thought about it that way. I guess so. I guess when what's the old quote is like, you never know how strong you are until being strong is your only option. And I think that was one of the situations where I had no choice but to lean into that. And I think that's kind of where, it's taken me.
I'm sure you know this, but in sharing something so deeply personal, there's a meme, since we're talking about memes, it's sort of going around about being kind because you never know what someone's going through.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure, given all of the times that your voice has been out there and that you've been sharing this story, that statistically there had to be someone in those spaces who was thinking some of the same thoughts. Full transparency, that was me as well. We have
Oh,
a lot of parallels in life. Speaking impediment, suicidal ideation and attempts. So I don't think it's hyperbolic to say you're doing God's work. And I'm not necessarily a religious person, but I think there's a reason they call you Brother Teresa.
First of all, I'm sending you so much love for just sharing that and speaking on that. Because, a lot of people, Wendy, you're absolutely right, are in a place where, and I'll tell you invariably what I've seen in the events that I've done now internationally is invariably one of three things happens after I get done with a keynote. So someone comes up to me and says, one, that they've lost a loved one who died by suicide. Two, there's someone who has attempted suicide in the past and they're suicide survivors, so to speak. Or three, and maybe the most interesting in terms of the situation, is that they're currently in a place where they're contemplating suicide. And that talk, or my talk, has helped them to see a different path. So we're in a place now where we're in a mental health crisis. I feel in America, we're all kind of operating with this like high functioning anxiety, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I think the pandemic kind of made it a little bit worse in terms of the energy that came out of that. And what I think the best way to heal throughout this is when people like you, you're so accomplished in what you've done, not just on Broadway, but as an MC and facilitator, saying on this podcast, right, that you've been there. And maybe in previous episodes that never came out. So maybe they're hearing this for the first time. And here you are, someone who moved past that into something that's created beauty in other people's lives. So just that example that you set, Wendy, is something that brings light to others. And I'm hoping in some ways that people who are struggling with anxiety or depression or just suicidal ideations in some way, my talks can bring a little light to them somehow, hopefully.
I think that's that call to action is a holy call to action. There is this thing called life is one of the biggest group projects we'll ever do.
I love that. That's good.
At the heart of the work that you do, at the heart of this ethos of your work, is this concept of Ubuntu. I want to understand it and the impact on our lives. Can you explain the concept of Ubuntu and how it influences our relationships and our interactions with others?
Yeah, sure. So Ubuntu is an African philosophy that means I am because we are. It is the height in my opinion, of human kindness, human compassion, and human connectedness. There's an African proverb that is my all-time favorite, and it says, if you want to go fast, go alone. Want to go far, go together. And Ubuntu is like kind of the encapsulation of that beautiful quote and that mantra of an idea of how we can go so much farther together. So when you think about Ubuntu, this concept, it's almost like there's no place where I end and you begin. So if you operate from this mentality, it changes how you see the world, right? So if I were to say something or do something to hurt you, Wendy, I would understand and pause before doing that, because I'd understand that without any shadow of a doubt that me hurting you also hurts myself. So it's one of those things where we understand our shared humanity. And I feel like right now in this hyper divided world that we're in, the more that we're able to connect to our shared humanity, the better. And to be clear, Ubuntu isn't like this weird idea around like, we're all the same, so let's just get all like, no. We all have differences. And it's understanding and embracing the beauty of our differences and respecting our differences so we can come together to do great work, create beautiful communities, and change the world. It can only be done together. And the spirit of Ubuntu is the reminder of the power of our collective love, compassion, and kindness to create a better world for all of us.
I think that's such a sacred concept because to my eyes, we're living in a world that's over-indexed
Oh
on
my gosh.
rugged individualism.
Yes.
So it feels emotionally very Spartan. So, well, superficially, kindness may feel like or sound like a feel the moon, feel the stars sort of sentiment. What you're talking about is actually something deeply foundational and fundamental as a way of being, moving, and connecting.
Yes. And I'll tell you, kindness is so misunderstood, unfortunately. I think there's a softness to kindness that people feel like, this has no place in the hardcore world of business. What are we talking? Like, come on, man. It's like, look, well, a couple of things. One, no one does their best work in fear. So let's just be the people who feel like command, control, this authoritarian type of, dictator mentality is going to get work done. You will have short spurts of compliance, but compliance compared to people doing the work because they choose to, not because they have to, is not sustainable, right? You want people to actually do the work because they choose to, not because they're forced to. And when I talk about kindness, the one question that I always ask leaders is like, I ask about leaders to individual contributors. I always ask them, if your boss did not have their authority over you, would you still choose to follow them anyway? And for me, that's an idea of what it truly means to lead with kindness, because kindness is one of those powerful things that creates better workplaces. It allows people to be more open, creates more psychological safety in a workplace where people are willing to be vulnerable and trust others. There's more accountability, better attitudes, better communication, conflict is dealt with better. But these are the things that I think about with kindness, because I often hear people, whoa, Shola, you telling me that I can't hold someone accountable then? I can't fire someone because I need to be kind? Is that what you're saying? Hey, my guy, my gal. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. In fact, if you can't do those things, fire someone if needed, hold them accountable. If you can't do those things with kindness, then you probably shouldn't be leading other people in the first place. Kindness, right? I'll speak on it, Wendy, because I think this is the thing that's so frustrating to me, is this idea that kindness about letting people walk all over you, take 2-hour lunches, watch cat videos on their computer while they should be doing work. Like, that's not kindness. That's being a doormat. That's nothing kind about that. Kindness is demonstrating through your actions that you genuinely care about another human being. And one last thing, Wendy, real quick on this, is a lot of people use nice and kind interchangeably. Ubuntu is about kindness, not niceness. Nice is being polite and agreeable, right? That's a super low bar. Anyone can be nice. Some of the worst human beings on earth can say a please or thank you. Kindness is a matter of depth. Nice is surface level. Kindness is deeper, where I'm demonstrating through my actions that I actually care about you as a human being. So that means I will have difficult conversations with you because I care. I will talk to you about things that other people choose to avoid because I care. And if needed, if we have to have that difficult conversation in the workplace about possibly letting you go, I will do so because I care about you as a human being, doing your best work, whether it's with me or elsewhere. Kindness is deeper and way harder than niceness because it's surface level and, quite frankly, isn't enough to change the world in a meaningful way.
Love that. Kindness feels like a practice,
It is.
like yoga or religious practice. What you're describing, what you said dovetails so beautifully when you were talking about the authoritarian nature of leadership, how we live in a society where there are work communities where deference to tenure and title are the default setting. You have introduced this idea of civility, and the Southern girl in me genuflects. Like, this is me. There is something in me. That idea is so deeply resonant in me. And I love this idea of courageous civility, particularly as it pertains to leadership, right?
Yeah.
Empowering teams and encouraging collaboration. Talk to us a bit more about those precepts.
Yeah, so I love civility. I think it's something that is also a little bit misunderstood. It's truly it's deeper than just politeness and being agreeable. This is around the idea of how can we demonstrate sincerely that we respect the other human being that's across from us, and maybe even more importantly, are we able to lean into the concept of disagreeing without disrespect? This is the one challenge I think our country, not just America, to be clear, it's the world, struggling with this idea of disagreeing without disrespect. So when I talk about courageous civility as a leader, it kind of goes back a little bit to what I was talking about with kindness. We're going to engage in challenging conversations. And I think, you know, one of the challenging conversations that are common right now in workplaces are ones around diversity, equity, inclusion. I think that's something that people struggle with. And it's like people want to be civil, they want to have these conversations. But what I often hear from people is, oh my gosh, like I don't even know what to say. I want to show that I'm supportive of this, and I want to show that I am civil around other races or physical ability or religions or etc. But I just don't know if I'm gonna say the wrong thing. Or what if I say the wrong thing? And my response is always the same. It's like, spoiler alert, you will say the wrong thing. I mean, that's part of this work. It's like this has been going on, diversity, equity, inclusion in some form or capacity for centuries, and we're still talking about this work. What are the odds of you or me or anyone else pitching a perfect game every single time we hit the mound? Like, we're gonna have mistakes and slip ups and just not do it correctly. But courageous civility means that we're going to engage in the conversation in an attempt to make things better, knowing that if we do make a mistake, we're going to own said mistake and learn from it and commit to doing better the next time. If we do that, we can change the world. But I think a lot of people don't take that first step. That's why I add courageous to civility, of taking that step to maybe reach out to someone who you may perceive to be different from you, and realizing that they probably want the same thing that you want: kindness, respect, to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. If we can take that step, I think we start bridging some gaps, but it's going to require someone to get onto the dance floor first.
There's so much grace in what you just shared. My therapist always says, trust intent, but name impact.
Do we have the same therapist? Because my therapist says the same thing. He says, talks about the difference between impact and intent. And I think, to that point, Wendy, I think that's something that's huge, especially when you do this work. I think oftentimes when people do step in it, and say something that's inappropriate for whatever reason, and it's clearly offensive, oftentimes people say, "Oh, that wasn't my intent." Well, that wasn't my intent. And I challenge people in this work of courageous civility to I get that. I understand that that's kind of, wasn't their intent. But if I'm running through my office workspace and I'm wearing steel toe boots and I'm running through the hallway just having fun, and I end up stepping on a woman who's wearing open-toed shoes and I break her foot, right? My intention was not to break her foot. I'm here to have some fun and running around like, being silly. So if I broke her foot and I'm coming at her like, that wasn't my intent, that wasn't my intent. The reality is fair, but the impact is that this woman is now going to be in a cast for 6 to 8 weeks because of what I did. So if I don't acknowledge the impact of my actions, then unfortunately, I'm not going to have an opportunity to get to a place of healing. So understanding the difference is a huge springboard into having courageous civility, not leaning into defensiveness or gaslighting or stuff like that when things happen in the workplace, and leaning into genuine understanding and ownership of our actions. And I think that's how we can get there.
That is great, great advice. I have a very simple question for you, but it's probably the biggest of all the questions I'll ask you today. Why is being kind so difficult for so many?
I think the one thing that I learned early on is that hurt people hurt people. And for some people, kindness is hard because maybe they've been in a situation where they extended kindness to others and that kindness was taken advantage of in a way that hurt them. So oftentimes when we're in a position where we've had our trust and our walls down and someone hurt us, to protect ourselves from that happening again, we put up walls. And oftentimes it can appear as being unkind. So kindness is hard for people. But I think our natural state is connection and kindness. And I believe that even the most unkind person at one time in their lives defaulted to kindness, but they might have had something happen to them where they felt that kindness is going to bring some pain to them. So they protect themselves from pain. We're human beings, we're pain avoiders. That's what we do. So someone is in a position where they've had their kindness hurt them in some way, or someone hurt them because of their kindness, then their mind is like kindness equals danger. So I got to protect myself. And I think this goes into the concept of kind of resilience in a way. It's like my challenge for people is if you believe that you can bounce back quickly from other people maybe mistreating you due to your kindness, then you're more willing to give that kindness to others. And so I often talk about that. Can you bounce back quickly from it? Because of course, people often ask me, Wendy, in events during the Q&A, well, what if someone takes advantage of your kindness? What do you do about that? And for me, I'm like, that's not, for me personally, just me as Shola, that's not a thing. Because
Same.
my kindness was a choice, right? So like I'm choosing to do this. So if you choose to be like, well, I'm going to use that as an opportunity to get something from him, maybe unfairly or something that he wouldn't expect or whatever, it's like, okay, that's information that I now know that you're that type of person, and I back away, but I'm not going to let that person's lack of kindness stop me from giving kindness to someone else who could use it and need it. But I think it comes from a place of understanding and being able to bounce back from the hurt and disappointment of someone mistreating you when you're kind, and realizing that kindness is important enough to give to the next person and don't hold the weight of someone else's actions against a future person that you may interact with.
What so much of what you said, I don't know why I hear my mother's voice,
Same.
Melanie. And my mom used to say all the time, don't be out there acting wise and otherwise. The way that other people react or act around us should not be the progenitor of how we move through the world. And
Mm,
I think what you're articulating is actually a really empowering preset and concept for people to tether their lives to and to move through the world with. Because if who we are and how we function and how we relate to others is predicated on what we get back from them, I don't know. I don't want to live like that. And I don't want to live my life walking through the world like that.
me neither. And I think that, it's interesting because there's some folks who lean into unkindness as a way to kind of, build what they perceive to be connection. I don't want to walk through a world like that either. There's a quote, my brother turned me on to this, is really funny, and it's true. Excuse my language, but it's important. He said, honeybees do not waste a moment of their time trying to convince flies that honey tastes better than shit. And there's a point to this, right? If you're in a position where you're like, you know what, like, I know kindness is honey. It's beautiful, it builds real connection. And some people are there kind of like, flying over the poop, like, yeah, man, this is where it really is at. No, it's not. If you just leaned into kindness, you would understand this is how we build real connection. That's how we live the spirit of Ubuntu. And you'll realize once you walk away from like the rudeness, the snarkiness, the passive aggressiveness, the gaslighting, the narcissism, it's such a beautiful other world full of honey that is so much better for you and just beautiful. And the little joy you think you're getting from that pile over there is not the same that you're going to get from honey and the kindness and the connection that you get from just treating each other well.
The church said, Amen. We speak to communities that are, they want proof of concept. Talk to me about some of the practical strategies or approaches that you've taught and learned about bridging these divides and fostering understanding in these community and workplaces, and examples of when you've actually seen that happen in real time.
Gosh, there's lots of practical things that can be done. I feel like one of the most practical things that is important is this concept of leaning into your discomfort. I know that term is used a lot. I always take it a step further, is just becoming comfortable with your own discomfort. So when you feel like a conversation needs to be had, or there's something that you need to do, whether it's talking to your boss about maybe some ill treatment that you received in the workplace, or maybe addressing someone who said something offensive to you, or maybe talking to your spouse about a need or a want that's not being met. These things are all uncomfortable, but the part of Ubuntu, that idea of connection, is that you feel that discomfort and you just choose to do it anyway. And it doesn't mean that you're absent of fear when you do this, but you understand that the only way out is through, is you're taking that step, that meaningful step forward. So that's one. Another thing that I always challenge people to is to examine their biases in a really practical, thoughtful way. Out of Harvard University, there's it's probably the leading test in understanding our own implicit biases. It's called the implicit association test, IAT. Anyone can just Google the implicit association test to find it, and it's free and it takes only a few minutes of your time. But why I find this to be so interesting is there's IATs, implicit association tests, that you can take on things like race to see if you have an implicit racial bias, or gender, or even weight to see if you have bias towards people based on their weight. Why this is so interesting is that when you take this test, it's going to help give a little bit more awareness to the idea of like, oh my gosh, like I do have a bias against people of color, just making this up, right? And then what that can do for you is that if you're in a space where you're working with people of color, you can become more present and more mindful of those biases before you go into an interaction, or while you're having that interaction, knowing that's something that you're experiencing. Another practical thing to think about, sorry, I could go on forever, there's lots of different things, is I challenge people often to think about when you see behavior that you don't understand. And I often like to say, every time you see bad behavior or something that you just find to be strange, two things you can do. One is remain in curiosity and stay out of judgment. But more importantly, I think about this. Whenever you see bad behavior, just remember this. All bad behavior is simply an unskilled expression of an unmet need. Meaning, I'll say it again, all bad behavior is simply an unskilled expression of an unmet need. So when you see bad behavior, and you will, if you're willing to lean into curiosity and be like, I wonder what's going on here with this person. Maybe there's a need that's not being met, that's being displayed in a rather unskilled way. It allows us to lean into curiosity. And I think when we choose judgment as our first response to behavior that we don't understand, it shuts down any possibility of getting to a solution. You already decide the person's an idiot. So you just move on. It's like, this guy, who would act like this? What an idiot. Instead of just being like, I wonder what's going on with him. Because then that opens up an opportunity to find some level of compassion, connectedness. We've all had bad days, right? You already said it earlier, Wendy. We don't know the struggle that someone else is going through. So if we can lean into curiosity and instead of judgment, it can make a huge difference at bridging divides. And I can go on, but there's lots of different ways to do this. Things that I love to mention in my keynote. But the fun thing is there are really practical ways to do this. But I think before you even get to any practical thing, it's the understanding that you believe that our shared humanity is important, that kindness is important, that compassion is important, that disagreeing without disrespect is important. Once you get to a place where you decided that those things matter, that's the key to starting to bridge divides and change the world in the process.
That's a skill set. That's a muscle that people can learn to exercise, that pause, that moment before you react. I had the opportunity to interview Derek Jeter.
Oh, wow. Geez, the captain. Let's go. Okay.
Oh, he's lovely, just like you. And he talked about people. He said it's important to be disciplined in your character.
Mm,
And I think that's what you're describing is being disciplined enough to take that moment to be curious, empathetic, inquisitive, and to find out what that there is. Like what's really happening in this moment. That's so important. You mentioned earlier, we all know it. I don't even think there's been enough conversation about it. Maybe we're a year out about the impact of the pandemic.
mm,
How there have been repercussions behind um, those 2 years, that year and a half of shutdown.
mm,
So many people are at a low ebb. Some of the work that you do is centered around resilience, right?
mhm.
And the crucial role that resilience plays in navigating life's challenges. How do you, Shola Richards, define unstoppable resilience? And how can individuals cultivate this in their own lives?
So I love the idea and the concept of resilience. I think it's often misunderstood. I think people have this weird idea of like kind of like SEC football coach energy. It's like, suck it up, buttercup, quit being a baby. Like that's not resilience. That's like a totally surefire path to a nervous breakdown. So instead, I look at resilience. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from difficult circumstances, right? So when you add the unstoppable part to it, the idea is this could be something that you tap into consistently. And oftentimes, what I talk about with resilience is a little bit different, kind of based more in science, the idea of like what we can do to set ourselves up to increase the likelihood of us being able to bounce back from a difficult circumstance. A couple examples that I often talk about is our mental health, and I'm big on our mental health, and I'm also big on doing things. I'm really, from a mental health perspective, I'm really big on doing things that do not drain our strength and our ability to respond to the challenges of the world. So I'll give you an example. I think sometimes you see people who spend an excessive amount of time watching cable news, for example.
My parents.
Yeah, no, same. So, I mean, I can't think of anything that is worse for your resilience than that, because you're looking at the world through an incredibly distorted lens. They call this stuff angertainment for a reason. They don't care. The news networks, cable news networks, don't care about your mental health. They just want you to continue coming back. But what they do is they have the algorithm down. They know what it is that gets you all excited. It's the same news stories over and over again. You keep coming back for more, coming back for more. But what this does is it weakens your ability to bounce back from difficult circumstances because you're at a place of anger, distrust, fear. anxiety, all these things that outrage, all these things that make it harder for you. So I challenge people to step away from that. Social media can be the same thing. It can have similar circumstances. If it's making you feel angrier, right, instead of feeling at peace, these things are things that we do unconsciously, almost reflexively. When we get home, we grab our phone. Sometimes people have like news alerts pinging their phone every 10 to 15 minutes. That is not a recipe for wellness, I promise you. So that's one thing that I try to talk about: elimination or reduction. Also, toxic people. There are people who deal with toxic people in their lives, and they keep them around for reasons that are unbeknownst to me, or reasons that they feel like they have to, like the sunk cost. Well, I spent 15 years with this person, I can't just leave now. Well, sure you can. And maybe you should if you're in a position where you're really hurt by it, right? Um, Resilience, one of my topics that I love. That's just two examples. But one thing I'll throw in there as the final one is the idea that resilience is something that you need to do alone. And I think that's not true, and it needs to be reset. Resilience, and the most resilient people have a strong network around them to help support, because you can't be all things to yourself. You can't be someone who make yourself smile and offer yourself empathy, or to be there to help you to push back against difficult people. Like, oftentimes you need someone there in your network to support you. And I talk about the importance of community to build that unstoppable resilience, because there's some days where you're just not going to have it. I don't care how strong you think you are, that grit that you feel you have. There's going to be days where there's nothing in the tank. And so what are you going to do? You got to lean on others, but that also requires a level of vulnerability to feel like, you know what? It's okay for me to reach out to this person. They're not going to shame me or make me feel bad for me sharing that I'm struggling, or I need help, or I just need to cry. The strongest people that I've run across are the ones who lean into the power of their network consistently. And I hope when I see people who do this, they're the ones who not only have the opportunity to create better lives themselves, but for others as well. And dare I say, in the process, become unstoppably resilient.
This is such life-changing, world-shifting work that you're doing. This could be a heavy lift, right? In less capable hands, their knees might buckle, but you're out here doing this important. I talk a lot about how we spend so much time at work. We probably spend more time at work than when we actually do with our families.
That's true.
How impactful that time can be, and why not use it for great good, rather than pretty okay. I've been thinking a lot about legacy. What do you want your legacy to be? What is Shola Richards' magnum opus?
Oh my gosh. Such a good question, Wendy. I would say maybe two things. One is, the world needs you to be kinder than you may feel comfortable being. So be kinder in every interaction. There's a quote from a man named Brennan Manning. He said, in every interaction, you're either giving life or you are draining it. There is no neutral exchange. So that level of self-awareness, that we can be kinder, and having people become aware of how their words and actions affect others, I think that's a huge thing. If I could have a legacy, is that anyone who's ever seen me speak or has read my books becomes deeply aware of how their words and actions affect others. That'd be one thing. The second thing that I would hope for from a legacy perspective is that you have everything within your power to make the change that you want to see in this world. Like, I didn't have like like so many degrees after my name, or letters after my name, or whatever, or experience in this field. I just decided that I wanted to make a change, and I just put myself out there on social media for public consumption. Like, I don't know, let's see what the world thinks. And if anyone is hearing my voice, it's like, ah, man, like, I don't know if I can do this. Kim Kardashian started with 0 followers at one time, and it was hard to believe, but it happened. Just put yourself out there and stop the idea of comparing yourself to other people. If I'm going to sit here and compare myself to Mel Robbins, I'll be so depressed. I love Mel Robbins. She's my gal. We've never met, but I love her. So if I saw her like, oh, one day I'll be Oprah Winfrey. I love Oprah Winfrey. I'm not Oprah. I'm not Mel Robbins. I'm not Brene Brown. I'm not Les Brown. I'm not any of these people. So what I need to do instead is just lean into doing what I can with what I have from where I am. And anyone here inside my voice can do this. And that'd be my legacy that I'd leave. One, be kinder, be aware of how your words and actions affect others. And two, just lean into the idea that you don't need anyone's permission to go out there to do the work that you've been put on this earth to do. Begin.
Begin. Oh, that's kindness. Get into it, y'all. I love that, Shola Richards. Thank you so much for joining us today. You are the brightest of lights. I adore you. And
Likewise, Wendy.
we thank you for shining the light on the dark places in us. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.